Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sharp Vision with 25. Welcome to our first episode. We're really excited to be starting this podcast. Today, I'm joined with our very own co-founders, Magnus Bjorendahl and Richard Minney, and our head of sales and partnerships, Nate Joseph. Today, we wanted to dive into the topic of why prioritizing project pricing in your business strategy matters, and just provide some insights from these three on the project pricing industry. So first question I have for you all is, where do you think the gaps are in how businesses today approach pricing in their business?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about this. I think one thing that I find quite interesting about this topic of project-based pricing is not just where are the gaps, it's the fact that it is a kind of process where people don't take it quite seriously enough, I find. People are actually, to some degree, not putting a focus on it. Like, there's not a dedicated function in the company typically that is focusing on pricing. And it's left very much up to the individual person that is dealing with an opportunity to somewhat, based on their own just best knowledge. Maybe they've been doing this for 20 years and they're kind of leveraging what they have learned over those years as to how to best price something. And that's kind of left being okay, I think. This is the part that kind of bothers me to some degree, is that a lot of companies find it acceptable that that's the best you can do. And I think that we clearly believe that there's a lot of room for opportunity. This is a process that is very, kind of like not looked upon enough. A lot of other principles or disciplines in a company, take it accounting or supply chain or manufacturing or AR or AP, like there's a lot of processes in a company where people are spending, day after day trying to figure out how to get better at and across the business. And this is an area where someone is left ignored, I think. So I think that's the first observation that I've seen. This is somewhat true for all the various industries that we serve. So we're serving professional services clients, we're serving aerospace and defense clients and whatnot, and it is a neglected part of the business to some degree. The other thing that I think is an interesting thing to note is that industries where they're not selling projects, like let's say you're selling consumer goods, or if you're selling airline seats, or like those industries, it's kind of clear that pricing is a bigger priority. And I think also it's true that in those industries, people are seeing tremendous benefits to come up with new better strategies for how to best price certain types of product in certain types of markets. So there's just this gap between how project-based industries are focusing on this versus how other industries. And I think this is, something that we feel like is a void in the marketplace that we're really looking to help out with.
I can echo that. I think they say all businesses run on Excel and PowerPoint, and essentially it couldn't be more true here with the case of Excel. As Magnus pointed out, if you're selling widgets, if you're selling products, if you're selling repetitive services like travel, the pricing is quite mature. It's even dynamic. But when you're selling projects, it's very immature and it's almost always done in a spreadsheet. I've been in consulting for 30 years and done countless proposals, every one on a spreadsheet and every one different to the one before it, even when working for large firms. So the discipline around pricing is not there today, and it's left very much to the whim and tribal knowledge of the partner, engagement manager, project manager, etc., who's putting together the initial bid. People underestimate the power of pricing. The profitability of the project is determined very highly on the price, especially when it's fixed fee, not time, materials, or cost plus. So, and that's a trend that's happening more and more as the government spends more money on a fixed price basis. So the importance of pricing really couldn't be greater. At the same time, people are not very mature in how they do it.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say to that is there is this notion, I think, which I think is a false statement, quite honestly, is that everybody thinks that every project is unique, and because that's left as an excuse to say that I can't really have repeatability and learning from my past experiences. It's like every time as I get a new RFP with a new set of requirements from a new client, and because of that, I'm somehow left that everything that I've done in the past doesn't matter. It's only this set of requirements. And I think that's where people go wrong. I think that the thing I would challenge with that is, if that would be true, then why did you get the RFP in the first place? Like there's a reason that somebody picked you as the company to send it to. And the reason they sent it to you is because you have done exactly that. You have done something in the past that is similar to what this client is asking for. Otherwise, they will go to somebody else, quite honestly. So I think that kind of by definition means there is things that you've done in the past that does matter, that does impact how this price, whatnot. And you have competed in other places. You've lost and won for various reasons. You have delivered project of similar scope, and there's a lot of things there that is typically undervalued, and people like, yeah, there's the knowledge that's in the head of the partner or the person, but imagine that you would have the knowledge of all the partners across all your businesses, and you bring that collective knowledge into pricing your opportunity. Like you would be sitting in a room, and all the best partners with all that history would help you price it in a better way. That's kind of where this needs to go, versus just leaving it up to this one guy. So I think this idea of collective knowledge across the business, and how can you make that in a systemic way, and make it better. That's kind of why this problem actually can be solved. I think it definitely is a solvable problem.
And it
There's
goes
also,
beyond. Oh, go on, Nate. Sorry.
I was going to say, so I think there's also an element when you look at it from a sales perspective around pricing, that salespeople just want to win deals, right? And so oftentimes price is what they think is going to move the needle, either to win a deal or that's why we lost was because of our price. And also there's another sort of misconception that, oh, we'll just make it up on the back end and we'll just find new ways to make money off this client once we have the signed purchase order. But the reality is, like, it's not so easy to go in and just upsell clients on new products or new services, especially after you've already agreed upon a price. So there's also an element of understanding what you're worth in that project. And I think, as Magnus stated, not every project is unique, but I also think that there's some projects where some companies can charge more just based off of experience or off of expertise in that area, where a competitor can't bring the references, the value that another vendor could, and therefore they can't justify a higher price tag. And so I think in terms, and I like what Magnus had said originally around how a lot of firms aren't really thinking about pricing as a strategic lever that they can pull. But the reality is, like, there isn't any other part of your business where you can get better by 1 or 2% and actually impact margin and revenue without changing a single thing about your business. But if you look at pricing, it's like, if you can find ways to make an extra 1 to 2% across each project, you can make more money without doing anything materially different in your business. And that's truly, to me, what the power of better pricing does for companies and can unlock.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean raising prices across the board by 1 or 2%.
Mm-hmm.
It means understanding, like you said, where the value is. So many companies price on the cost basis and they add some margin. So many companies do that, and that's one dimension. But the value that you bring to the customer and what the customer is willing to pay and what your competitors are charging in the market is the other dimension, the other 2 dimensions, which affects the price. So there'll be some services that you're offering that you can't increase in price. Maybe you shouldn't be offering them anymore. You're not competitive. And there'll be other services that you're under by 20%, frankly. And you can charge 20% more and you still win the same amount of business. And understanding that is what unlocks increase.
Yeah, and I mean, and that even goes back to literature. Like people and professors that talk about how to price, there's typically 3 dimensions that you talk about. One dimension is the cost, the other dimension is the value, and the third dimension is the competition and the competitors in the marketplace and whatnot. So it's like, how much value am I delivering to the client? What does the competitive landscape look like, and what's the cost? And typically, the notion is that the more commoditized something is, a product, whatnot, the more prices are steering in the direction of competition and cost. And the more differentiated you are, meaning that the thing that you offer is uniquely different from what somebody else can offer, the more you're going in the direction of value, because now the competition no longer matters as much, and now it's more about convincing the client that you're offering so much value to this client, and therefore the value is the thing that matters. So I think that is something that the first thing that somebody needs to understand when they price is, where are we along those three dimensions in this specific opportunity? Like, are we highly differentiated? Are we a commodity? And just because you're a commodity doesn't matter. You still can't make money, right? But obviously, you then have to think a little bit differently in the way you price it. So I think that it's really important for customers to understand, for somebody who's pricing a project to understand those set of dynamics, so that they can find the right price point in the marketplace.
Right. Thank you for providing those insights. And so then moving on to my next question is, what would be your best advice to businesses wanting to take the first step in prioritizing their pricing strategies? What would you suggest?
So the first thing is to look at what you've done before. As Magnus mentioned, you don't normally bid on something that's brand new. You bid on a hybrid of something you've done before. You change it. And companies have a very rich history. Often it's on PDF. It's in contracts, it's on rate cards, it's on some catalogs, some pricing strategies, but there's a very rich history in the company of what's been done before. And if you analyze that information, you can start to pull out the patterns. So you might get an idea of what the cost drivers and the price drivers are in the underlying data set. So for example, if you're a consulting business and you have a senior consultant in business transformation, what rate have you charged in the past? What rate have you got away with? Do big customers pay more than small customers? Do they pay more in Europe than in Asia, or more in the US than in Europe? What about your position? If you're like being sole sourced, or if you're providing strategic value, can you charge more? And this whole spectrum of analyzing this, it's not just data science on its own. You've got to understand what's behind the numbers, what's behind the prices that came up before, and what was successful and what was not successful. So that's a great first step. Doesn't involve any system necessarily, but obviously you'll quickly begin to determine what the cost drivers are, and then you'll reach a conclusion that you do need a system which can ingest that information and can start to help you define those cost drivers and price drivers, and define your pricing strategies accordingly.
Yeah, and to build upon that, I think that addresses really well the idea around the data. And I think people, to Richard's point, has a lot of this data, but it's not stored or maintained in a way that is actually really used in a meaningful way. So I think that the first idea is, let's use the example of Excel spreadsheets, right? If all your proposals are in Excel spreadsheets, how would a system take advantage of that? Because it's just on a bunch of people's hard drives. So the first idea is, you got to think about, how do we actually become more systemic in capturing and storing that data? I think that's and retrieving the data that's already available. So that's and then how do we use this data as part of making decisions for the next project? I think that's one aspect. The other aspect is this aspect of the knowledge of the people, right? So there is inherent knowledge of people in the organization that has read things and that have done things in the past and whatnot. It is also about bringing to bear expertise of how to best price projects into the actual point in time where you're going to make a pricing decision. So we have clients that are talking about, they actually have a central pricing function in the organization that their sole purpose is to understand how to best price projects, right? And that organization obviously becomes the sharp end of the pole, so to speak, in the sense of really understanding this really well, and bringing that knowledge into the situation where you're trying to price a new product is the other element to it. So I think it's both what can the data tell you, and it's also how can you actually build competency in the business around how to best price, given certain competitive situations, given whatever, because you want to make sure that you get into that sweet spot of being at the right price point, given all those dimensions of value, price, cost, right? So I think if you can get both sides right, you both have the data, because the data tells part of the story, and then what the people can add to that, you now have a very, very rich picture to help price. Because I think this, I use this example a lot of times when I talk to clients, which is it is impossible to say that the data alone can make a pricing decision. I don't think we're at the point where you can run AI, you can press a button, it will read through a bunch of data and it will come up with the right price. I don't think we're pretty far from that. I also don't think it is fair to say that if you ignore all the data and you just take the best knowledge in people's mind, you can also make the best decision. I mean 25, and the way we've built our tools and all this stuff is based on the assumption that there's value in the data, what the data can tell you, and there's value in what the people can tell you. And it's really when these two worlds come together that you can make ultimately the best decisions for how to price.
Yeah, and Magnus, you bring up a good point there, because I would almost argue that before you start diving into the actual processes and data, you need to also take a look at from a personnel perspective, like, do we have the right people on our team that can help us with these pricing strategies? Or do we even have defined pricing strategies today? Because it's quite fascinating to me when we walk into a client that's a Fortune 500 company that says we don't actually do commercial planning, or we don't actually price projects in a standard way. We just sort of pull out a spreadsheet and do it and hope to God that it's profitable at the end based off of some similar piece of work we've done in the past, even if it might not be an exact comparable. So I before you go dumping all this time, effort, money into your process and into new tools, you also have to understand at a base level, do we actually have people in the business that can build pricing strategies, or that have built pricing strategies in the past? Because to me, your tool can only be as good as the people that are ultimately using it. So there needs to be you need to address the personnel issue as well before you go dive into more the technical data and tooling aspect of it all.
Yeah, and I mean, if you speak a little bit about the tool, what we bring to bear, I think that is interesting too, is around this people process. It is to identify simple patterns, such as, on the basis of this opportunity is $5 million and it's priced at a 15% margin. That's not within the norms of how we want to run our business. And how does that automatically get flagged for additional set of approvals in the business, right? So you can clearly define kind of like the thresholds where you find acceptable of who needs to review things. Like if you go into a car dealership today and you go in and ask for a 15% discount, they'll go and say, well, I need to go talk to my manager for that because that's above what we typically would offer. It's a similar idea here, that where you can actually be proactive around what do we think is normal, what's in the right range, and where something is clearly out of the range of the norm, and how do we deal with those exceptions? Sometimes it's for a good reason. Sometimes we're entering a brand new market. We're okay to have lower margin in this project. We think this deal is going to lead to a lot of other deals. So you're making a strategic investment to say we're going to win this deal. But that's decisions that executives should be making, right? That's just strategic decisions for your business, which all make sense. But they need to get flagged, they need to get raised, and in that case, that's the case, somebody on the higher up needs to make those approvals. So I think it is bring the data to bear, make sure you have the right people involved, but it's also actually establishing some proper rules in and around pricing for project-based businesses so that they can make sure that they stay within bounds where they're happy, right? So I definitely, and the other thing that Nate touched upon is this idea around the sales like to win at all costs, right? So if you have a sales organization that is motivated or based on selling a certain number of deals, you get to the last day of the quarter, what issue is it to add another 5 or 10% discount? I'm gonna still make millions of dollars. My manager, my sales VP is gonna be super happy because he met his numbers and whatever. But the impact of closing that deal means you might have sold a deal where you're not going to deliver any profit of it because you shaved off all the margin in that last thing. So it is that kind of discipline that is also needed, where a lot of times the reasons why margins are low is because people would make desperate deals at the end of the quarter to make or break the quarter. So again, sometimes for a good reason, but a lot of times not for good reasons at all. So we definitely think that there's plenty of opportunity to get better at this function.
Yeah. And customers are getting better at this too. So you talked about the three dimensions, the cost, the value, and the market, and the commoditization of services. So customers are very keen to commoditize things, and they're keen to be priced based on cost. They can understand that, and they get value for money. But at the same time, the suppliers, people providing the services, are looking to provide value. That's why they're constantly inventing IP, intellectual property. That's why they're constantly inventing new service offerings. And obviously, in the case of consulting firms, jumping on new technologies and new trends so they can be ahead of their customers. So there's a dichotomy between the customer who's looking to commoditize the service and pay cost plus a small margin, and the supplier who's really looking to look for value. Analyzing all three is so important. Cost is the most important. We're not denying cost is critical. Understanding your cost properly, understanding your margin, your target margin, things like strategic investments. The other thing is risk and contingency. A lot of people come up with a cost. They may do it fairly quickly in a spreadsheet and without any adherence to what the risk is in the project. It's fixed fee or it's T&M, they don't even know perhaps, and they come up with a resource plan which they think could probably do the work. But there's a big difference between a $1 million task that's somewhere between 900 and 1.1 and a $1 million task that's somewhere between 500 and 1.8 million. So there's a much wider variance, there's a much bigger risk. So that whether you pad the margin or whether you add the contingency as a cost, that needs to be adjusted as well in the pricing decisions.
Yeah, and that's a really, really good point. So this is something that I think people by definition, they're very used to accounting where a number is a number. This idea, the fact that there's really a range of possible outcomes is something that people in general are not very comfortable in terms of how to even think about that, especially as it relates to, well, how do I consider that when I make an actual decision? But if you paint the picture to what Richard just described, if you paint the picture of two scenarios where on the one side I have $1 million plus minus 10% and the other scenario plus minus 50%, I will have a very different attitude to how I'm going to price that with the client. The first question I would ask is, there's so much risk involved in this engagement and I cannot price it on the top end of that risk. So naturally, I might disqualify things like doing a fixed price engagement. I might say that there's no way, dear customer, that I will do this as a fixed price engagement because of all this variability. And you're only willing to actually accept terms on the basis of time and material. Or alternatively, can I actually engage with the client to rethink how that risk is shared with the client? Can I move some of that risk over to the client and thereby making the range narrower, right? Whereas if the band is pretty narrow, I've done 100 of these projects in the past, I'm a construction company, I'm building a house and I've done 100 of these houses before, whatever, the risk is much more narrow. I might feel way more comfortable to go in, first of all, get closer, I'd be more aggressive. Secondly, being fixed price and whatnot. So you have a very different attitude in how you are actually taking those two different scenarios in. So this is something we talk a lot about with our customers as to what are the right mechanisms. And risk is also, the other thing with risk by definition is very difficult for humans to think of. Because it's like you having to anticipate what might or might not happen and putting a number on that. So it's like, you're gonna deliver this project. What is the chance that I have a risk for happening at 50% probability at $150,000? It's conceptually very, very difficult. So we have concepts in our solution that helps user more describe as based on history. Like, okay, so what is this project? Is it more like this, or more like that? And then based on this kind of questionnaire-based approach, they can have a much more easy to understand risk assessment that can then in turn help translate that into where's those range of possible outcomes. So risk is a really, really big deal. I mean, thanks for bringing that up, Richard, because that really does make a difference in terms of how to best find that right price point.
Well, thank you. These were some great pieces of advice for other businesses looking to improve their own pricing strategies. I know we only have a few more minutes left, but maybe lightning round of some impacts that you guys have noticed in your years working in the pricing industry. What are the kind of major impacts that businesses will gain if they choose to prioritize their project pricing strategies?
So this one's very simple. If you can improve your margin, you improve your bottom line. Nate made the point earlier, 1% improvement in margin, it's 1% of revenue extra without any cost at all, almost no cost. So if you're a $1 billion business, that's $10 million on the bottom line every single year. But on top of that, if you price better, you'll have better project delivery outcomes. You'll have happier customers, and you'll have happier consultants or people working on the programs because they're more successful as well. So setting a realistic goal, more realistic goal with risk and everything included, gives a much better outcome to the projects.
I don't have much to add to that. I think you basically can impact on two ends of the spectrum. One is the win rate, right? So actually knowing when to increase the price, when to reduce the price, having that better situational awareness when you make those pricing decisions certainly can help you also win. It's not just winning more deals, it's also winning the right deals, right? So sometimes to your point, like if you want to sign a deal but you're going to lose money on it, then what was the point to win it? So it's knowing to win good business is what you're looking for, which is healthy, profitable, good business where you can make happy customers and then lead to more customers. So those pricing decisions are tremendously important to increase win rates and also increase margins on the project that you're working on. So people really, I mean, the conclusion is that it's crazy how people are not putting more emphasis around this function, honestly. And of course, we think we can help out a lot, both with our knowledge, quite honestly, but also with the tools that we bring to the table.
Right.
Yeah. The only other thing I'll add to that, because you guys are right, I think it's very cut and dry what the impact is of better pricing decisions. But it's also what the impact of that extra money can do for the business itself. Because I think that making an extra $10 million to line the pockets of the executives, like, yeah, that motivates 5 or 10 people. But from a sales perspective, if you have higher margin, your commission's going to be higher on the deal. So you're inevitably going to make more money. And then also there's going to be more money to funnel back into the business to make strategic investments. So there's also an element of like product improvement that could come from you charging more, or quality of service increases due to the fact that you're able to charge more. You could then go hire more senior people, whatever it may be. So I think that there also has to be some sort of tie back into the company goals around, hey, if we're able to make this additional revenue this year, what does that actually mean for the business? And that could mean, yeah, opening new manufacturing plants or developing into new countries, whatever it may be. So that's also the impact that this has on the business versus just like, yeah, making more money is great, but it's also around what they're able to do with that money to make an impact on the business.
Okay.
Right.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.